It is said that Camilla has just been moved out of the castle, and the story behind it intrigues us all.
Most people assume the real story began when concerns emerged about King Charles III's health. Yet according to palace whispers, something far more consequential may have happened moments before anyone focused on doctors, ambulances, or medical updates. One private exchange, witnessed by only a handful of people, allegedly set off a chain of events that would leave senior royal figures asking a single question: who was the king truly placing his trust in? The atmosphere inside the royal residence was said to be unusually tense long before any official explanation emerged. Staff members reportedly noticed doors closing more quickly than usual, conversations ending abruptly when others approached, and a level of caution that suggested something significant was unfolding behind the scenes. While public attention remained fixed on the condition of King Charles III, some royal observers would later argue that the more important story involved decisions being made within the walls of the palace itself. What made the situation particularly intriguing was the timing. Whenever uncertainty surrounds a reigning monarch, questions naturally begin to surface about continuity, responsibility, and the future direction of the institution. Yet this time, according to accounts that later circulated among royal commentators, there appeared to be an unusual urgency attached to a private meeting involving Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Prince William, the Prince of Wales. Why would such a discussion need to happen immediately? And what could possibly have required such discretion? Those questions became even more difficult to ignore when reports began suggesting that Catherine had been summoned without advance notice. Royal schedules are normally planned with remarkable precision, often weeks in advance, which made the alleged urgency of this meeting stand out. Some palace watchers believe the decision reflected a practical concern about stability. Others suspect it pointed toward something much larger, something connected not merely to temporary responsibilities but to long-term trust within the royal household itself. And that is where another layer of the mystery begins. For years, Catherine has cultivated a public image built around calmness, discipline, and consistency. Whether attending engagements, representing the monarchy abroad, or navigating periods of intense public scrutiny, she has rarely appeared rattled. Yet observers who study royal symbolism often note that moments of genuine significance inside the institution are not always accompanied by public announcements. Sometimes the most important decisions occur quietly, long before the public becomes aware that anything has changed. If that was true here, then what exactly was being decided? According to some commentators, the answer may lie in a growing recognition of Catherine's evolving role within the monarchy. As the wife of the future king, she already occupies one of the most influential positions in royal life. But influence and authority are not always the same thing. Influence can be earned through public respect. Authority, however, requires trust from those at the very top of the institution. That distinction has fueled enormous speculation. Some royal analysts have argued that King Charles III has spent recent years thinking carefully about the monarchy's future beyond his own reign. The challenge facing every sovereign is ensuring continuity while preserving public confidence. In that context, the relationship between the king, Prince William, and Catherine becomes particularly important. If a private decision really was made during a moment of uncertainty, many observers believe it would reveal a great deal about where Charles believed the future strength of the institution truly resided. Yet another question soon emerged. Where did Queen Camilla fit into this picture? For decades, Camilla has occupied a unique position within the royal family. Her journey from controversial public figure to queen consort required years of careful reputation rebuilding. By the time Charles became king, many believed her place within the institution had become firmly established. That assumption is precisely why recent rumors have attracted so much attention. Not because they have been proven, but because they challenge expectations people thought were settled long ago. Whenever questions of authority arise inside historic institutions, perception becomes almost as powerful as reality. A single rumor can trigger weeks of discussion. A single unexplained decision can generate countless competing interpretations. And in this case, the lack of clear information has only intensified public fascination. Some observers believe the entire story has been exaggerated. Others argue that fragments of truth often hide behind palace silence. The difficulty, as always, is determining which details matter and which details merely distract from the bigger picture. What nobody disputes is that Catherine's position has grown steadily stronger. Recent years have seen the Princess of Wales assume increasingly prominent responsibilities while maintaining extraordinarily high approval ratings. Public appearances that once focused primarily on symbolism now carry broader significance. When Catherine speaks, audiences often interpret her words through the lens of the monarchy's future. When she appears alongside Prince William, many already see a preview of the next reign. That reality alone makes any story involving her impossible for royal audiences to ignore. But there was another development that deepened the intrigue even further. According to persistent speculation among royal watchers, the alleged private exchange was not simply about immediate circumstances. Instead, some believe it reflected deeper concerns about succession planning, institutional stability, and the preservation of royal authority during periods of uncertainty. If true, that would transform the story from a temporary family matter into a question about the future direction of the monarchy itself. And if that interpretation is correct, then one crucial mystery remains unanswered. What exactly happened behind closed doors during those critical moments before attention shifted toward the king's condition? Was Catherine merely receiving guidance as a trusted future queen, or was she being entrusted with something far more significant than anyone realized at the time? The answer to that question would trigger an entirely new wave of speculation, and what emerged next would leave royal commentators examining every detail far more closely than before. If the private exchange raised questions in the first place, what happened afterward made those questions considerably harder to dismiss. What royal commentators began noticing was not a dramatic public announcement or an obvious constitutional change, but a series of subtle shifts that seemed to point in the same direction. Individually, none of them appeared extraordinary. Together, however, they created a pattern that many observers found difficult to ignore. The conversation was no longer centered solely on what may have occurred behind closed doors. It was increasingly focused on what those events appeared to reveal about the future balance of influence within the monarchy. One reason the story gained momentum was because of how unusual the timing seemed. During periods of uncertainty, institutions generally attempt to project continuity and stability. The royal family has spent generations refining that approach. Yet some analysts noted that recent developments appeared to place Catherine in a more visible and strategically important position than many expected. That observation immediately raised another question. Was this simply a natural evolution of her role as future queen, or was something accelerating that process behind the scenes? The distinction matters because royal authority operates on several different levels at once. There is the authority visible to the public through ceremonies, engagements, and official duties. Then there is the quieter authority that exists inside the institution itself, where trust, judgment, and reliability often determine who becomes involved in important decisions. Throughout history, those two forms of authority have not always belonged to the same person. Some figures have enjoyed immense public popularity while exercising little internal influence. Others have shaped major decisions while remaining largely invisible to the public. According to several royal analysts, the growing fascination surrounding Catherine stems from the possibility that she may increasingly represent both forms simultaneously. That possibility leads to a much larger issue than a single private meeting. If senior figures within the institution are gradually placing greater confidence in the Princess of Wales, what does that suggest about preparations for the future reign of Prince William? Royal transitions are rarely defined by a single moment. Instead, they tend to unfold gradually through countless small decisions that only appear significant when viewed together. Looking back, historians often identify signs that were largely overlooked at the time. Some commentators are now asking whether current events might eventually be viewed in a similar way. Yet another complication soon emerged. The monarchy is not simply a family. It is also an institution supported by traditions, advisors, households, and long-standing structures of authority. Whenever influence appears to shift within such a system, there are inevitably different perspectives regarding what that shift means. Some view change as necessary preparation. Others see it as a potential source of instability. As a result, even seemingly routine developments can become subjects of intense scrutiny. This may explain why so many observers became interested in reports surrounding internal consultations and decision-making processes. Not because anyone could independently verify every claim, but because the broader implications seemed increasingly significant. If key responsibilities were being discussed, delegated, or reconsidered during a sensitive period, then the story was no longer about a single event. It was about the future shape of royal leadership itself, and that created a new layer of uncertainty. Several royal watchers have noted that public perception often influences institutional realities. When enough people begin to see someone as a central figure in the future of the monarchy, that perception can become self-reinforcing. Expectations rise, responsibilities expand. Every appearance is examined more closely. Every interaction carries greater significance. In that environment, even ordinary decisions can generate extraordinary attention. The Princess of Wales appears to occupy precisely that position today. What makes the situation particularly fascinating is that Catherine's public profile has largely been built on consistency rather than controversy. Unlike periods in royal history dominated by conflict and public disputes, her reputation has been shaped by patience, discipline, and a carefully measured approach to royal duties. Some commentators argue that this reliability may now be one of her greatest assets. Others believe it could become an increasingly important factor as the monarchy navigates future challenges. But that interpretation raises another question that remains unanswered. If confidence in Catherine has indeed been growing at the highest levels, what specific qualities are driving that confidence? Is it her ability to connect with the public? Her experience managing increasingly demanding responsibilities? Her relationship with the future king? Or does the answer involve considerations that remain largely hidden from public view? No single explanation has emerged. Instead, what has emerged is a growing sense that the discussion surrounding Catherine reflects broader concerns about continuity, resilience, and leadership within the royal family. In other words, the conversation may not be about one individual at all. It may be about what kind of monarchy senior figures believe will be most effective in the years ahead. That possibility becomes even more intriguing when viewed through a historical lens. Previous generations of royals often experienced lengthy periods of preparation before assuming greater responsibilities. Yet historians frequently note that the most revealing moments were not always public ceremonies. They were private decisions indicating where confidence truly resided. Looking back, those decisions often served as early signals of larger institutional shifts already underway beneath the surface. Could something similar be happening now? Some analysts believe recent developments may represent evidence of long-term planning rather than short-term reaction. Others caution against reading too much into incomplete information. Both perspectives contain elements of logic, which is precisely why the story continues to attract attention. Every new detail seems to support one interpretation while simultaneously creating fresh questions. And perhaps the most important question concerns Prince William himself. As future king, William's position naturally places him at the center of any discussion about the monarchy's next chapter. Yet some observers have suggested that recent developments reveal something equally important about the partnership between the Prince and Princess of Wales. Modern royal leadership increasingly depends not only on individuals, but on teams capable of managing immense public expectations. If that assessment is correct, then what appears to be a story about Catherine may also be a story about the future royal partnership preparing for responsibilities larger than ever before. Still, there is one detail that continues to puzzle even experienced royal commentators. For all the speculation about trust, influence, and preparation, very little is publicly understood about what conversations may have been taking place behind palace walls during this period. The visible signs point in one direction, yet the motivations remain largely concealed. And whenever actions appear clearer than explanations, curiosity tends to grow rather than diminish. What makes that uncertainty especially significant is the possibility that another development may already be approaching, one capable of revealing whether recent events were merely isolated circumstances or early indications of a much larger transition taking shape inside the monarchy. If that moment arrives, it could fundamentally change how this entire story is understood. What makes the story increasingly fascinating is that the more observers attempt to explain it through a single event, the less satisfactory that explanation becomes. By this stage, many royal commentators have shifted their focus away from the alleged private exchange itself and toward the pattern that appears to surround it. The question is no longer simply what happened. The question is why so many developments seem to point toward the same destination. One connection repeatedly highlighted by analysts involves preparation. Institutions as old as the monarchy rarely operate through improvisation. While unexpected situations inevitably arise, long-term stability usually depends on years of planning that remains largely invisible to the public. That reality may explain why some royal watchers believe recent developments should be viewed through the lens of succession preparation rather than immediate crisis management. If so, then what attracted attention was not the decision itself, but the possibility that it revealed plans already in motion. That interpretation helps explain another puzzle. Throughout modern royal history, individuals who eventually assumed major responsibilities often experienced a gradual expansion of influence long before formal authority arrived. The process was rarely announced. Instead, trust was built incrementally through private consultations, increased visibility, and participation in decisions that extended beyond ceremonial duties. Some commentators have suggested that Catherine's evolving position increasingly resembles that pattern. Yet if that comparison is valid, another question immediately follows. Why now? Royal analysts have pointed out that timing often reveals as much as the actions themselves. The monarchy currently faces pressures that previous generations encountered in different forms, maintaining public trust, adapting to changing expectations, preserving continuity, and preparing for eventual transitions. None of these challenges are unique. What makes them significant today is that they are occurring simultaneously. Under such circumstances, dependable leadership becomes exceptionally valuable. This may help explain why discussions about the Princess of Wales have become intertwined with broader conversations about institutional resilience. Interestingly, some observers believe the most revealing element is not Catherine's growing prominence, but the reaction it has generated. Whenever influence shifts within any long-standing institution, attention naturally follows. Supporters see reassurance. Critics see risk. Neutral observers see evidence that something important may be changing beneath the surface. The differing interpretations themselves become part of a story because they reveal how much significance people attach to the future direction of the monarchy. That dynamic creates another important connection. Much of the public conversation continues to focus on individuals, yet the institution itself may be the central concern. Royal households operate according to priorities that often extend far beyond personal relationships. Decisions are frequently evaluated according to stability, continuity, and public confidence rather than immediate popularity. If some form of long-term planning is indeed underway, then many recent developments begin to look less like isolated events and more like pieces of a larger strategic picture. But that perspective introduces a fresh uncertainty. If the institution is preparing for future challenges, what specific challenges are considered most important? Publicly, there is little indication of dramatic change. Yet historians frequently note that major transitions often appear gradual until viewed in retrospect. Looking backward, patterns become obvious. Living through them, however, is far more complicated. That historical reality has led some commentators to draw cautious parallels with previous periods of royal transition. Not because the circumstances are identical, but because institutions often respond to uncertainty in familiar ways. Trusted figures become more prominent. Responsibilities expand quietly. Public appearances acquire additional meaning. Most people notice individual developments without immediately recognizing the pattern connecting them. Some analysts argue that this is precisely what may be happening now. Another factor attracting attention is the apparent emphasis on partnership rather than individual leadership. Discussions about the future monarchy increasingly focus on William and Catherine together rather than as separate figures. This is significant because modern royal leadership depends heavily on teamwork. Public expectations are more demanding than ever, media scrutiny remains constant, and the institution must balance tradition with contemporary relevance. In that environment, successful partnerships can become strategic assets. That observation may explain why certain developments have generated so much interest among experienced royal watchers. They are not necessarily looking for dramatic revelations. Instead, they are examining signals about how future leadership might function. Every institution ultimately depends on confidence. Confidence among advisors, confidence among staff, confidence among the public, and perhaps most importantly, confidence among those responsible for ensuring continuity from one era to the next. If confidence is the real story, then another connection becomes difficult to ignore. Many discussions surrounding recent events have centered on trust rather than power. Those concepts are related, but they are not identical. Power can be granted through position. Trust must be earned over time. Some royal commentators have noted that trust often becomes most visible during periods of uncertainty, when leaders must decide whom they rely upon most heavily. If that observation is relevant here, then the developments attracting attention may reveal less about authority and more about confidence in future stewardship. Still, there remains a missing piece. While observers can identify patterns, they cannot fully explain the motivations behind them. Reports suggest various possibilities. Some emphasize preparation for future responsibilities. Others point toward concerns about institutional continuity. A few believe the explanation may involve internal discussions that have never reached the public domain. Each theory explains part of the picture, yet none appears capable of explaining all of it. And that unresolved gap may be the most important clue of all. Because when patterns become visible before their purpose becomes clear, it often suggests that a larger story has not yet fully emerged. The visible developments may be real, the interpretations may contain elements of truth, yet the underlying objective remains concealed. In many ways, the audience now finds itself in the same position as royal observers attempting to understand events in real time, aware that something significant may be taking shape, but unable to see the entire design. What makes that uncertainty especially compelling is that the next revelation may not change one aspect of the story. It may force a reinterpretation of everything that has come before. If the connections identified so far are accurate, then the issue may never have been about a single decision, a single meeting, or even a single individual. It may involve a much broader question about how the monarchy intends to navigate its next chapter, and why certain preparations appear to be happening now rather than years from now. And if that possibility proves correct, then the most consequential part of a story may still be waiting to emerge. By this point, the individual pieces of a story begin to matter less than the pressure they collectively create. What many royal commentators have increasingly focused on is not whether a particular conversation occurred exactly as reported, but whether recent developments reveal a broader institutional response to changing realities. When multiple signals point in a similar direction, attention naturally shifts from isolated incidents toward their combined significance. And in this case, the cumulative effect has become difficult for observers to ignore. One consequence is that expectations surrounding the future leadership of the monarchy appear to be evolving faster than many anticipated. For years, discussions about the next era largely centered on Prince William's eventual accession. That assumption has not changed. What appears to be changing, however, is the extent to which public conversations increasingly treat Catherine as an essential component of that future rather than simply a supporting figure within it. Royal watchers have noted that this distinction may seem subtle, yet its implications are potentially significant. Institutions rarely elevate expectations without reason, particularly when stability remains a priority. That observation becomes even more important when viewed alongside another emerging reality. The monarchy today operates in an environment where public confidence must constantly be maintained. Every appearance, every statement, and every decision is interpreted through the lens of future leadership. As a result, even relatively small developments can acquire outsized importance because they contribute to broader narratives already forming in the public mind. Some analysts argue that this process has accelerated considerably over the past several years. If that assessment is correct, then the consequences extend far beyond reputation alone. A growing number of commentators have suggested that the institution now faces an unusual balancing act. On one hand, continuity remains essential. On the other, preparation for future leadership cannot remain entirely invisible forever. Eventually, signs of transition become noticeable, even when nobody officially describes them as such. This may explain why recent discussions have generated so much attention among those who closely follow royal affairs. The pressure created by that situation is substantial. Whenever expectations rise around future leaders, scrutiny inevitably follows. Every decision becomes subject to interpretation. Every appearance generates analysis, Every shift in visibility prompts questions about purpose and timing. Some observers believe this heightened attention reflects confidence. Others caution that it can also create challenges by raising expectations to levels that become increasingly difficult to manage. Yet that tension itself may reveal something important. Royal institutions tend to avoid unnecessary risk. They are built to endure across generations rather than react impulsively to short-term developments. If commentators are correct in identifying a pattern of increasing responsibility, then many analysts believe such changes would almost certainly reflect deliberate thinking rather than coincidence. That possibility introduces a larger question. What future circumstances are planners attempting to prepare for? The answer remains uncertain, but the range of possibilities appears to be narrowing. Several royal commentators have pointed out that conversations once focused primarily on current events are increasingly centered on long-term leadership capacity. In other words, attention is moving away from immediate developments and toward future readiness. This shift matters because it changes how observers interpret everything else. Actions that once appeared routine begin to look strategic. Decisions that seem temporary begin to appear part of a longer trajectory. And that is where multiple storylines begin converging. The growing focus on trust, the increasing visibility of future leadership, the emphasis on institutional continuity, the apparent effort to maintain stability during periods of uncertainty. Viewed separately, each development could be explained in numerous ways. Viewed together, they begin forming a more coherent picture. Not a complete picture, but one that suggests larger priorities may already be shaping decisions behind the scenes. What makes this convergence particularly compelling is the reaction it has produced. Reports suggest that different groups interpret the same developments in very different ways. Some view them as evidence of careful preparation. Others see indications of accelerated change. Still others argue that the public may be overanalyzing perfectly ordinary developments. The existence of these competing interpretations matters because uncertainty often reveals where the most important questions remain unanswered. One of those unanswered questions concerns responsibility. If future leadership is indeed becoming more central to institutional planning, then responsibility inevitably increases alongside influence. Public expectations become heavier. Strategic decisions become more consequential. Mistakes become more costly. Some royal analysts have argued that this may be one reason recent developments have attracted such close attention. The story is no longer about who may hold influence. It is about who may ultimately bear responsibility for guiding the institution through its next chapter. That realization significantly raises the stakes, because responsibility inside the monarchy extends beyond public engagements and ceremonial duties. It involves preserving trust, protecting continuity, managing expectations, and maintaining confidence across multiple audiences simultaneously. Few institutions face comparable pressures. Fewer still must navigate those pressures under constant public observation. As a result, another consequence is beginning to emerge. The discussion is no longer confined to personalities. Increasingly, it revolves around capability. Observers are asking not merely who occupies important positions, but how prepared those individuals may be for challenges that have yet to fully materialize. That subtle shift transforms the entire narrative. The focus moves from current circumstances toward future tests. And it is precisely here that the pressure appears to intensify, because some royal watchers have noted an intriguing contradiction. The more signs of preparation seem to emerge, the more questions arise about what exactly is being prepared for. If existing structures are functioning as intended, why does the conversation increasingly revolve around readiness, continuity, and future leadership? Is this simply prudent planning by an institution that always thinks decades ahead? Or does it reflect concerns that remain largely hidden from public view? No definitive answer has emerged. Yet the absence of an answer may itself be revealing. Historically, the most significant institutional shifts often become visible through indirect signals long before their full meaning is understood. People recognize movement before they understand direction. They sense preparation before they know its purpose. And that may be where the story now stands. Because if the patterns, pressures, and reactions discussed so far are connected, then the next development may not simply add another piece to the puzzle. It may reveal why the puzzle was being assembled in the first place. Should that happen, many of the assumptions guiding the story until now could suddenly look incomplete, And what currently appears to be a discussion about trust and preparation may instead be the opening chapter of something far more consequential than anyone initially realized. And that may ultimately explain why the story has continued to attract attention long after the original questions first emerged. By now, many royal commentators are no longer focused on determining whether one particular conversation occurred exactly as reported, or whether a specific moment carried the precise significance some observers have assigned to it. Instead, attention has shifted toward what the entire discussion appears to reveal about the monarchy's current direction. The deeper story is not necessarily about a single decision. It is about the conditions that made such a story resonate so strongly in the first place. What has gradually become clear is that the public conversation reflects a growing awareness that the monarchy is entering a period of transition, even if that transition remains incomplete. Transitions within royal institutions rarely begin on the day a crown changes hands. They often begin years earlier through subtle adjustments in visibility, responsibility, and expectation. The individuals involved may continue performing familiar roles, yet the meaning attached to those roles slowly evolves. What once appeared routine begins to carry greater significance because audiences increasingly view it through the lens of the future rather than the present. That shift in perspective may be one of the most important developments revealed by this entire story. Because when observers examine Catherine's position today, they are not merely evaluating current responsibilities. They are assessing what those responsibilities suggest about the years ahead. Every institution eventually confronts a simple but unavoidable question: who will carry its values, traditions, and public obligations into the next era? Increasingly, many royal watchers believe discussions surrounding the Princess of Wales reflect an effort to answer precisely that question. Yet even that interpretation points toward something larger. The monarchy's greatest challenge has never been preserving buildings, ceremonies, or titles. Its greatest challenge has always been maintaining relevance across generations while preserving continuity. That balancing act becomes particularly demanding during periods when public expectations are changing rapidly. Institutions must adapt without appearing unstable. They must modernize without abandoning identity. They must prepare for the future without creating the impression that the present is already ending. Those pressures help explain why trust has emerged as such a recurring theme throughout the story. Not trust in the narrow personal sense, but trust as an institutional asset. The ability to reassure the public. The ability to represent continuity during uncertain periods. The ability to embody stability while change gradually unfolds. Some analysts have suggested that this form of trust may become one of the defining requirements for future royal leadership. If that assessment proves accurate, then the significance of recent developments becomes easier to understand. What initially appeared to be a discussion about influence may actually be a discussion about stewardship. Influence concerns who matters today. Stewardship concerns who will guide the institution tomorrow. The distinction is subtle, yet profoundly important. One focuses on current events. The other focuses on legacy. And legacy is where the story begins to acquire its deepest meaning. Royal history is filled with moments that seemed relatively minor when they occurred but later came to symbolize larger transitions. Historians often identify these moments only in retrospect, after enough time has passed for broader patterns to become visible. At the time, participants rarely recognize that they are living through developments that future generations may view differently. Some observers believe the current period could eventually be interpreted in a similar way. Not because of any single event, but because of what the collection of events appears to represent. Increasing responsibility, growing expectations, long-term preparation, heightened public attention. These developments may not point toward immediate transformation. What they may indicate instead is the gradual emergence of a new chapter already taking shape beneath the surface. That possibility, naturally, leads to another important consideration. Future leadership will inherit challenges that differ significantly from those faced by previous generations. Public engagement operates differently. Media cycles move faster. Expectations regarding transparency continue to evolve. Maintaining trust requires constant effort. As a result, the qualities that define successful royal leadership may increasingly extend beyond tradition alone. Many commentators argue that this reality makes preparation more important than ever. The next era of the monarchy will not simply be judged on ceremonial continuity. It will also be evaluated according to adaptability, public confidence, and institutional resilience. In that environment, the development of future leaders becomes more than a matter of succession. It becomes a matter of long-term strategic importance. This may be why so many observers continue returning to the same underlying question. Not what happened during a particular moment, not who said what behind closed doors, not even which interpretation ultimately proves most accurate. The enduring question is whether the events discussed throughout the story reveal an institution actively preparing for challenges that are still coming into view. If so, then the significance extends far beyond any individual personality. It becomes a story about how one of the world's most recognizable institutions manages continuity during a period of gradual but unmistakable change. And perhaps that is the revelation that brings the entire narrative into focus. The event that first captured attention may never have been the real story. The real story may be the growing recognition that the monarchy's future is already being shaped long before the formal arrival of its next chapter. Decisions made today are increasingly interpreted through tomorrow's expectations. Responsibilities carried now are evaluated according to future demands. Public trust built over years may become one of the most valuable assets any future sovereign inherits. The immediate questions that spark discussion may eventually fade. New developments will emerge. New debates will follow. Yet the broader issue will remain remarkably consistent. How does an institution built upon continuity prepare for change without losing the qualities that give it meaning in the first place? That question reaches beyond any single headline, any single rumor, or any single period of uncertainty. It touches the very heart of royal leadership itself. Because while crowns, titles, and generations may change, the challenge of balancing duty, stability, public confidence, and long-term vision remains constant. So when future historians look back on this period, what will they see? Will they view it as a routine phase in the monarchy's ongoing evolution, or as an early indication that a significant transition was already taking shape beneath the surface long before most people recognized it? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the royal family, Prince William, Catherine, Princess of Wales, King Charles III, Princess Anne, and the future of the monarchy, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next royal analysis. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you in the next video.